Warriors and Valkyries, welcome to the realm of Norse sagas. Prepare yourselves to embark on an epic journey through the icy fjords and blood-soaked battlefields of the Viking world. If you're passionate about Norse legends, don't miss our upcoming adventures. Click the subscribe button right now, it's very important to us, so subscribe. Also, tell us, from which part of Midgard are you watching? Leave in the comments the name of your city or country, we'd love to know. Hammer that like button as Thor strikes his enemies. Now grab your axes and shields, all because
the musty scent of aged wood and forgotten memories filled my nostrils as I climbed the narrow stairs to my grandfather's attic. It had been years since anyone had ventured up here, and the task of clearing out the space felt more like an archaeological expedition than a simple cleaning job. "Freya, be careful up there," my mother's voice echoed from below. "Some of those floorboards are older than you are." I rolled my eyes, though a smile tugged at the corners of my mouth. "I'll be fine, Mom. I'm not exactly stomping around up here." As I reached the top of the stairs, I pulled the cord of a single bare bulb, casting a dim light over the cluttered space. Dust motes danced in the air, disturbed by my presence after years of stillness. Stacks of cardboard boxes loomed like miniature skyscrapers, their contents a mystery waiting to be unraveled. I moved carefully through the attic, my fingers trailing over old furniture draped in sheets. Each object seemed to hold a story, a piece of my family's history that I'd never known. As I neared the far corner of the attic, something caught my eye. A shape beneath a faded tarp that didn't quite match the other covered furniture. Curiosity piqued, I grasped the edge of the tarp and pulled it away, revealing a large, flat stone tablet. Strange symbols were carved into its surface, lines and curves that seemed both alien and oddly familiar. My heart raced as I realized what I was looking at, a runestone. "Mom," I called out, my voice trembling with excitement. "You need to see this." I heard her footsteps on the stairs, and moments later she appeared in the attic, slightly out of breath. "What is it, Freya? What did you find?" I gestured to the runestone, my eyes wide with wonder. "Look at this. It's a runestone, isn't it? What's it doing up here?" My mother's brow furrowed as she approached, her expression a mix of surprise and confusion. I had no idea this was here. Your grandfather never mentioned anything like this." As we stood there, staring at the ancient stone, a gust of wind rattled the attic window. The sudden noise made us both jump, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, as if the very air around us had shifted. "We should get this downstairs," I said, already trying to figure out how to move the heavy stone. "Maybe we can find someone who can translate it." My mother nodded, still looking bewildered. "Yes, of course, I'll call your father, he can help us carry it down." As we maneuvered the runestone down the narrow attic stairs and into the living room, my mind raced with possibilities. What secrets did this stone hold? And why had my grandfather kept it hidden away for so long? The next morning, as I sat at the kitchen table, poring over photos I'd taken of the runestone, the letterbox clattered. I jumped up, grateful for the distraction from the frustrating symbols that refused to yield their meaning. "I'll get it," I called out, padding to the front door in my socks. Among the usual bills and junk mail was a thick envelope addressed to me in elegant, handwritten script. No return address. Intrigued, I tore it open and unfolded the letter inside. "Dear Ms. Larson," it began, "I hope this letter finds you well. My name is Professor Eric Magnusson, and I believe we share a common interest in the works of Snorri Sturluson and the hidden treasures of Norse mythology." My heart skipped a beat. How could this stranger know about my fascination with the prose Edda and its enigmatic author? The letter continued. "It has come to my attention that you may be in possession of a certain artifact, a runestone of great significance. If this is indeed the case, I implore you to contact me at once. There is much to discuss, and time may be of the essence." At the bottom of the letter was a phone number and an address in Reykjavik. I read and reread the letter, my mind spinning with questions and possibilities. "Mom," I called out, my voice cracking with excitement, "you're not going to believe this." I spent the next hour on the phone with Professor Magnusson, my initial skepticism giving way to genuine enthusiasm as he shared his theories about the runestone and its connection to lost manuscripts of the prose Edda. "You must understand, Ms. Larson," his accented voice crackled over the line. "These texts could revolutionize our understanding of Norse mythology and medieval Scandinavian literature. But they are also dangerous in the wrong hands." "Dangerous?" I echoed, a chill running down my spine. "How so?" There was a pause before he answered, his voice lowered as if afraid of being overheard. "There are those who believe the prose Edda contains more than just stories. Some say it holds the key to ancient power that could reshape the world as we know it." I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly dry. "And you think this runestone is connected to these lost manuscripts?" "I'm certain of it," he replied. "Which is why I must insist that we meet in person. Can you come to Reykjavik?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. Could I really drop everything and fly to Iceland on the word of a stranger? But as my eyes drifted to the runestone, now sitting in our living room like some ancient sentinel, I knew I had no choice. "I'll be there," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Give me a few days to make arrangements." As I hung up the phone, my mother entered the room, her face etched with concern. "Freya, what's going on? Who were you talking to?" I took a deep breath, trying to figure out how to explain the bizarre turn of events. "Mom, you might want to sit down for this." Over the next hour, I recounted my conversation with Professor Magnusson and his theories about the runestone and the lost manuscripts. As I spoke, I could see the doubt in my mother's eyes slowly give way to a mix of fear and excitement. "But Freya," she said when I'd finished, "this sounds dangerous. And how do you know you can trust this professor?" I shook my head, struggling to find the words to express the certainty I felt. "I can't explain it, Mom, but I know this is important. It's like I've been waiting for this my whole life without even knowing it." My mother was silent for a long moment, her gaze drifting to the runestone. Finally, she sighed and reached for my hand. "There's something I need to tell you, Freya. Something about our family that I've never shared before." My breath caught in my throat. "What is it?" "Your grandfather. He always claimed that our family had a special connection to Snorri Sturluson. I never believed him. I thought it was just an old man's fancy. But now, with this runestone and this professor..." She trailed off, her eyes distant. "Mom," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "What kind of connection?" She squeezed my hand, her eyes refocusing on me with an intensity I'd never seen before. "He said we were descendants, Freya. Direct descendants of Snorri Sturluson himself." The world seemed to tilt on its axis as the implications of her words sank in. If what she said was true, then this wasn't just an academic pursuit or an adventure. It was my heritage, my birthright. As if in response to this revelation, the runestone seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy. I stood, drawn to it as if by some unseen force. As my fingers traced the carved symbols, I felt a jolt of electricity course through my body. "I have to go to Iceland, Mom," I said, my voice filled with a newfound determination. "I have to find out the truth." She nodded, resignation and pride warring in her expression. "I know, sweetheart. Just be careful. There's no telling what you might uncover." As I turned away to start packing, movement outside the window caught my eye. A figure in a dark coat was hurrying away from our house, their face obscured by a low-brimmed hat. My heart raced as I realized the implications. Someone had been watching us, listening in on our conversation. "Mom," I said, my voice tight with sudden fear. "I think we're being followed." She rushed to the window, but the figure had already disappeared around the corner. We exchanged a worried glance, the weight of our discovery and the dangers it might bring suddenly very real. "Pack quickly," she said, her voice low and urgent. "We need to get you to the airport as soon as possible." As I rushed upstairs to throw clothes into a suitcase, my mind whirled with questions and possibilities. Who was following us? What secrets did the lost manuscripts hold? And most importantly, was I ready for the journey that lay ahead? One thing was certain: my life would never be the same. The call of the north had sounded, and I had no choice but to answer. The icy wind bit at my face as I stepped out of Keflavik International Airport, my breath forming small clouds in the crisp Icelandic air. Despite the chill, excitement coursed through my veins. I was here, in Reykjavik, ready to uncover the secrets of the Prose Edda and my family's mysterious connection to Snorri Sturluson. As I hailed a taxi, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had followed me since leaving home. The memory of that shadowy figure watching our house lingered in my mind. "Where to, miss?" the taxi driver asked, his accent thick but friendly. "The Hotel Saga, please," I replied, settling into the back seat with my small suitcase. As we drove through the outskirts of Reykjavik, I marveled at the stark beauty of the landscape. Volcanic rocks and moss-covered fields stretched as far as the eye could see, occasionally interrupted by modern buildings that seemed almost alien against the ancient terrain. Upon reaching the hotel, I quickly checked in and made my way to my room. I had arranged to meet Professor Magnusson in the hotel lobby at 3 p.m., which gave me just enough time to freshen up and gather my thoughts. At precisely 3 p.m., I descended to the lobby, my heart racing with anticipation. I scanned the area, looking for anyone who might fit the description of an eccentric professor obsessed with Norse mythology. But as the minutes ticked by, there was no sign of Professor Magnusson. After half an hour of waiting, I approached the front desk. "Excuse me," I said to the receptionist. "I'm supposed to be meeting a Professor Eric Magnusson. Has he left any messages for me?" The receptionist checked her computer and shook her head. "I'm sorry, miss. There are no messages for you, and we don't have anyone by that name registered at the hotel." A cold dread settled in the pit of my stomach. Something was wrong. I spent the next few hours calling every hotel in Reykjavik, but none had any record of a Professor Magnusson. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. As night fell, I found myself wandering the streets of Reykjavik, my mind racing with possibilities and fears. Lost in thought, I barely noticed when I bumped into someone on the narrow sidewalk. "Oh, I'm so sorry," I stammered, looking up to see a young woman with piercing blue eyes and a mane of wild red hair. She smiled, her expression curious. "No harm done. You look a bit lost. Are you okay?" There was something about her open, friendly face that made me want to confide in her. "Actually, I'm looking for someone, a professor who was supposed to meet me, but he's disappeared." The woman's eyebrows shot up. "A missing professor? That sounds like the beginning of a good mystery. I'm Sigrid, by the way, local tour guide and amateur historian." "Freya," I replied, shaking her hand. "And you have no idea how right you are about the mystery part." Over cups of strong coffee in a nearby cafe, I found myself pouring out the whole story to Sigrid: the runestone, the letter, the connection to Snorri Sturluson, and the vanishing professor. Sigrid listened intently, her eyes growing wider with each revelation. When I finished, she leaned in close, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Freya, what you're talking about, it's not just history, it's legend. There have always been whispers about hidden knowledge in this city, secrets passed down from the time of the Vikings." She glanced around the cafe as if checking for eavesdroppers, then continued. "There's a network of tunnels beneath Reykjavik. Most people think they're just old sewers or wartime bunkers, but some of us believe they're much older and hold much darker secrets." My heart raced at her words. "Do you think the professor might have gone down there?" Sigrid nodded slowly. "It's possible. If he was looking for ancient knowledge, that's where I'd start." "Can you show me?" I asked, barely able to contain my excitement. Sigrid hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Meet me at the old harbor at midnight. And Freya, be careful who you trust." The hours until midnight crawled by. I returned to my hotel room, double-checked my backpack, and tried to calm my nerves. As the appointed time approached, I made my way to the old harbor, the sound of the waves lapping against the shore a soothing counterpoint to my racing thoughts. Sigrid appeared out of the darkness like a ghost, her red hair hidden beneath a dark hood. Without a word, she gestured for me to follow her. We wound our way through narrow alleys and abandoned lots until we reached a dilapidated warehouse. "Here," Sigrid whispered, pulling aside a rusted sheet of metal to reveal a dark opening. "Watch your step." We descended into the earth, the beam of Sigrid's flashlight our only guide. The air grew thick and damp, carrying the musty scent of ages past. After what seemed like hours of twisting passages, we emerged into a larger chamber. "By the gods," Sigrid breathed, her flashlight beam dancing across the walls. The chamber was covered in intricate carvings, runes, figures from Norse mythology, and complex geometric patterns that seemed to shift and move in the flickering light. As we examined the carvings, my flashlight beam caught something on the far wall. "Sigrid, look at this." It was a map, etched into the stone itself. At its center was Iceland, but off to the side, barely visible, was a small island I had never seen on any modern map. "That's it," I whispered, my finger tracing the outline of the mysterious island. "That's where the manuscripts must be hidden." Just then a voice echoed through the chamber, causing us both to jump. "Well, well, what do we have here?" I spun around to see a man emerging from the shadows. He was tall and lean, with sharp features and cold, calculating eyes. "Dr. Erickson," Sigrid hissed, her voice filled with contempt. The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Ms. Larson, I presume. I've been looking forward to meeting you." "Who are you?" I demanded, trying to keep the fear out of my voice. "Dr. Anders Erickson, archaeologist and historian, and you, my dear, are meddling in things you don't understand." He took a step closer, his gaze fixed on the map behind us. "I'm going to give you one chance to walk away from this. Forget about Snorri Sturluson, forget about the lost manuscripts. Go home and live your life." I stood my ground, anger replacing fear. "And if I refuse?" His smile turned cruel. "Then I'm afraid things will become unpleasant for you." Before I could respond, Sigrid grabbed my arm. "Run!" We bolted down one of the tunnels, the sound of Ericsson's angry shouts echoing behind us. After a dizzying series of turns, we emerged back onto the streets of Reykjavik, gasping for air. "We need to get to that island," I panted, my mind reeling from the encounter. Sigrid nodded, her face grim. "I know someone with a boat. But Freya, are you sure about this? Ericsson is dangerous." I thought of the runestone, of my family's connection to Snorri Sturluson, of the vanished professor. "I'm sure. Whatever's on that island, it's too important to let someone like Ericsson get his hands on it." Within hours, we were at the docks, boarding a small fishing boat captained by one of Sigrid's friends. As we set sail into the North Atlantic, dark clouds began to gather on the horizon. "Storm's coming," the captain growled, his weathered face creased with concern. "Might be a rough ride." As if in response to his words, the wind picked up, and the first drops of rain began to fall. The small boat pitched and rolled in the increasingly choppy seas. I clung to the railing, my knuckles white, as waves crashed over the deck. Through the spray and rain, I caught a glimpse of something in the distance, a dark shape looming out of the mist. "There," I shouted over the howling wind. "I think I see the island." But as I pointed, a massive wave slammed into the boat, nearly capsizing us. I lost my footing, sliding across the deck towards the churning sea. Sigrid's hand shot out, grabbing my wrist at the last moment. "Hold on," she yelled, straining to pull me back. As I dangled over the raging ocean, the wind and rain lashing at my face, I realized that this was only the beginning. Whatever secrets lay hidden on that island, they wouldn't give themselves up without a fight. With a surge of determination, I grabbed Sigrid's arm with my free hand, pulling myself back onto the deck. As I lay there, gasping and soaked to the bone, I knew there was no turning back now. The roar of the waves and the howling wind gradually faded, replaced by the gentle lapping of water against sand and the distant cry of seabirds. I opened my eyes, blinking against the harsh light of day. My entire body ached, and my clothes were stiff with dried salt. "Sigrid?" I croaked, pushing myself up on my elbows. "Captain?" A groan to my left answered me. Sigrid was sprawled on the beach a few feet away, her red hair matted with sand and seaweed. Of the captain or his boat there was no sign. "We made it," Sigrid mumbled, sitting up slowly. "Though I'm not sure I'd call this making it." I looked around, taking in our surroundings. We were on a narrow strip of black sand beach, bordered on one side by steep cliffs and on the other by the churning sea. A thick mist hung over everything, obscuring the island's interior. "Our supplies?" I asked, already knowing the answer. Sigrid shook her head. "Gone, along with the boat and the captain, it seems." We spent the next hour combing the beach, hoping to find something, anything, that might have washed up with us. But apart from a few pieces of driftwood and some tangled fishing net, the sea had claimed everything. "We can't stay here," I said, eyeing the cliffs. "We need to find fresh water and shelter." Sigrid nodded, her face grim. "And hope we don't run into Dr. Erickson. I'd bet my last krona he's not far behind us." We found a narrow path leading up the cliffs and began our ascent. The climb was treacherous, the rocks slick with sea spray and moss. More than once we nearly lost our footing, saved only by desperate grabs at hardy plants clinging to the cliff face. As we neared the top, the mist began to thin. Pulling ourselves over the edge, we found ourselves on a grassy plateau. And there, looming out of the mist, like a vision from the past, were the unmistakable remains of an ancient Norse settlement. "By the gods," Sigrid breathed, her eyes wide with wonder. Stone foundations formed the outlines of longhouses and smaller outbuildings. In the center of the settlement stood a large circular structure, its walls still partially intact. "A thing," I said, recognizing the ancient assembly place. This must have been an important settlement. As we wandered through the ruins, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The mist seemed to play tricks on my eyes, creating shadowy figures that vanished when I turned to look at them directly. "Sigrid," I whispered, "does something feel off to you?" She nodded, her hand straying to the small knife at her belt. "Like we're not alone." We approached the thing cautiously. Its stone walls were covered in intricate carvings, worn by time but still visible. As we circled the structure, I noticed something odd about one section of the wall. "Look at this," I called to Sigrid. "The stones here don't quite match the others." Upon closer inspection, we could see that this section of wall was actually a cleverly disguised door. With some effort, we managed to push it open, revealing a dark passage leading down into the earth. "Should we?" Sigrid asked, peering into the darkness. I pulled out my phone, relieved to find it still worked despite its dunking in the sea. The flashlight function cast a weak glow into the passage. "We've come too far to turn back now," I said, stepping into the darkness. The passage led us deep underground, opening eventually into a large chamber. As our lights played across the walls, we gasped in unison. Every inch of the chamber was covered in runes and symbols, more intricate and numerous than anything I'd ever seen. "This is incredible," I breathed, running my hand over the carved stone. "Some of these runes, I've never seen anything like them." Sigrid was examining a large stone table in the center of the room. "Freya, look at this. It's some kind of map, but not like any I've ever seen." I joined her at the table. The surface was indeed carved with what looked like a map. But instead of land masses and oceans, it showed a complex web of lines and symbols. "It's not a map of places," I realized, tracing one of the lines. "It's a map of knowledge. Each line must represent a branch of learning or a collection of stories." As we bent over the map, trying to decipher its meaning, a noise from the passage made us both freeze. Footsteps, and the murmur of voices. "Quick, hide!" Sigrid hissed, pulling me behind a large stone pillar. We held our breath as a group of people entered the chamber. They were dressed in a strange mix of modern and ancient clothing, carrying torches and what looked like old-fashioned weapons. "The signs are clear," one of them, an older man with a long gray beard, was saying. "Outsiders have come to the island. The ancient prophecy is unfolding." "But Elder," a younger woman protested, "how can we be sure these are the ones spoken of in the texts?" The old man turned, his torch illuminating a section of wall near where we hid. "The runes do not lie, Astrid. The Keeper of Stories has returned, and with her, the potential for great change, or great destruction." I shifted slightly, trying to get a better view, and knocked loose a small stone. The sound echoed in the chamber like a gunshot. "Intruders!" someone shouted. "Find them!" "Run!" Sigrid yelled, grabbing my hand. We bolted for the passage, the shouts of our pursuers close behind. We emerged from the thing into the misty daylight, running blindly through the ruins. "This way!" I called, spotting a gap in the rocks that looked like it might lead away from the settlement. We squeezed through the opening, finding ourselves on a narrow path that wound down the far side of the plateau. Behind us, we could hear the islanders spreading out, searching for us. "Who were those people?" Sigrid panted as we ran. "And what were they talking about?" "I don't know," I gasped. "But I think we just found out why this island isn't on any modern maps." We ran until our lungs burned, the path taking us down into a dense forest. The trees here were ancient, their gnarled branches reaching out like grasping hands in the mist. As we paused to catch our breath, a sound caught my attention, the faint trickle of water. "Do you hear that?" I asked Sigrid. "There must be a stream nearby." We followed the sound, pushing through thick underbrush until we came to a small clearing. A stream bubbled up from between some rocks, forming a clear pool before continuing down the slope. As we gratefully scooped up handfuls of the cool water, I noticed something odd about the rocks surrounding the spring. They weren't natural formations, but carved stones arranged in a deliberate pattern. "Sigrid, look at this," I said, brushing away some moss to reveal more carved runes. "It's some kind of, doorway?" As if in response to my touch, there was a grinding sound, and a section of the rock face swung inward, revealing a dark opening. "A cave," Sigrid whispered, her eyes wide. "But where does it lead?" The sound of distant voices made us both tense. Our pursuers were getting closer. "I don't think we have much choice," I said, peering into the darkness. "Whatever's down there, it's got to be better than facing those islanders again." Sigrid nodded grimly. "Into the unknown we go, then." With one last look at the misty forest behind us, we stepped into the cave. The stone door swung shut behind us with a final-sounding thud, plunging us into darkness. As we switched on our phone flashlights, illuminating a rough-hewn passage leading deep into the earth, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were crossing a threshold, not just physically, but into a world of ancient secrets and forgotten knowledge. "The Keeper of Stories," I murmured, remembering the old man's words. What did he mean by that? Sigrid shrugged, her face pale in the harsh light of our phones. "I don't know, but I have a feeling we're about to find out." With no way back and unknown dangers ahead, we began our descent into the heart of the island, each step taking us deeper into a mystery that had waited centuries to be unraveled. The darkness of the cave pressed in around us, broken only by the weak beams of our phone flashlights. The air was thick with the scent of damp stone and something older, more primordial. "We should have brought proper torches," Sigrid muttered, her voice echoing slightly in the narrow passage. I nodded, then realized she probably couldn't see the gesture. "Agreed. But at least we have some light. Let's hope our batteries last." We moved cautiously through the twisting passages, our lights revealing glimpses of rough-hewn walls adorned with faded carvings. The floor was slick with moisture, and more than once we nearly lost our footing on the uneven surface. After what felt like hours of walking, we emerged into a larger chamber. Our lights barely reached the distant walls, giving the impression of a vast, cavernous space. "Look," Sigrid said, pointing to the far end of the chamber. Is that firelight? Sure enough, a faint orange glow flickered in the distance. We approached cautiously, ready to duck out of sight at the first sign of the hostile islanders. But as we drew closer, we saw that the light came from a series of ancient-looking torches set into the wall. How are these still burning after all this time? I wondered aloud, examining one of the torches. Sigrid shrugged, a look of unease on her face. Magic? Or maybe they're not as old as they appear. Either way, I don't like it. With the torches providing better illumination, we could now see that the chamber was dotted with stone pillars, each carved with intricate runes and symbols. At the center stood a massive stone door, its surface covered in what looked like writing. As we approached the door, I felt a strange tingling sensation, as if the very air was charged with an ancient power. I reached out to touch the carved surface, and the words seemed to shimmer under my fingertips. It's a riddle, I breathed, tracing the lines of text. Listen to this. I am the keeper of tales untold, of gods and giants, of heroes bold. Speak my name and the way you'll find, but beware the price of knowledge unkind. Sigrid frowned. A riddle? But what's the answer? I stood there, my mind racing. The keeper of tales, gods and giants. It had to be related to Norse mythology. And then it hit me. Bragi, I said firmly, the god of poetry and storytelling in Norse mythology. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a grinding of stone on stone, the massive door began to swing open. How did you know that? Sigrid asked, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and suspicion. I shook my head, a little dazed myself. I'm not sure. It just came to me, like I'd always known it. As we stepped through the doorway, we found ourselves in a long corridor lined with more doors, each bearing its own riddle. Looks like we've got our work cut out for us, Sigrid said, eyeing the numerous doors. We moved from door to door, each riddle more challenging than the last. Some referenced obscure Norse myths, others required knowledge of ancient runes or complex wordplay. With each solved riddle, I felt a growing sense of unease. The answers were coming to me too easily, as if some hidden part of my mind was awakening. Sigrid, I said as we approached yet another door. Doesn't this seem a bit convenient? Like these riddles were made for me to solve? She nodded slowly. I've been thinking the same thing. It's almost as if... Her words were cut off by a deep rumbling sound. The ground beneath our feet began to shake violently. Earthquake, Sigrid shouted. We need to get out of here. We turned to run, but a massive chunk of the ceiling came crashing down between us, cutting off our escape route. Freya, I heard Sigrid call from the other side of the rockfall. Are you okay? I'm fine, I shouted back. But I can't get through. You need to find another way around. I'll try to circle back, her muffled voice replied. Stay where you are. But even as she spoke, I could feel the floor beneath me starting to give way. With a sickening lurch, it collapsed entirely, sending me tumbling into darkness. I landed hard on a sloping surface, sliding uncontrollably through pitch blackness. Just when I thought the fall would never end, I splashed into cold water, the shock driving the air from my lungs. Gasping and sputtering, I managed to drag myself onto a narrow stone ledge. My phone was gone, lost in the fall or the water. In the complete darkness, I felt utterly alone and terrified. Hello? I called out, my voice small and quavering in the vast space. Is anyone there? To my shock, a voice answered, not Sigrid's, but one that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Greetings, keeper of stories, the voice said, its tone neither male nor female, young nor old. Long have we awaited your return. A pale, shimmering light began to grow in the center of the chamber, gradually taking on a vaguely humanoid shape. It was like looking at a person made of mist and moonlight. What are you? I asked, my heart pounding. The figure seemed to smile, though it had no discernible face. I am a guardian, a keeper of knowledge much like yourself, though you do not yet understand the full extent of your role. My role? What are you talking about, and where's Sigrid? Your friend is safe, for now, the figure said, but your path lies elsewhere. Tell me, what do you know of the Prose Edda? I blinked, thrown by the sudden change of subject. It's a collection of Norse myths and legends, written by Snorri Sturluson in the 13th century. But what does that have to do with anything? The spectral figure began to move, circling me slowly. The Prose Edda is more than just stories, young keeper. It is a key to power beyond imagining, and you, with your bloodline, are destined to unlock its secrets. Bloodline? You mean my family's connection to Snorri Sturluson? I asked, struggling to keep up. Indeed, but the connection goes deeper than you know. Listen well. In lines of blood and ink entwined, the power of words you'll surely find. But heed this warning clear and true. What once was hidden now seeks you. Before I could ask what the riddle meant, the figure began to fade. Wait, I called out. I don't understand. But the spectral form had already disappeared, leaving me alone in the darkness once more. As if on cue, I heard Sigrid's voice echoing from a nearby passage. Freya, can you hear me? Over here, I shouted back, relief flooding through me. Moments later, Sigrid appeared, her flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. She helped me to my feet, her face etched with concern. Are you all right? What happened? I opened my mouth to tell her about the spectral figure and its cryptic message, but before I could speak, we both became aware of a new sound, the rush of water. Oh no, Sigrid breathed, her flashlight beam revealing a steadily rising water level at our feet. We scrambled to higher ground, but it quickly became apparent that the entire chamber was filling with water. The earthquake must have damaged some underground reservoir or redirected an underwater stream. There, I pointed to a small opening high up on one wall. If we can reach that, we might be able to escape. We began to climb, using the rough cave walls as handholds. The water rose steadily behind us, lapping at our heels with each passing moment. As we neared the opening, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was all part of some greater test. The spectral figure's words echoed in my mind. What once was hidden, now seeks you. Sigrid, I gasped as we pulled ourselves through the narrow opening, the water mere inches behind us. I think there's more going on here than we realized. This isn't just about finding lost manuscripts, it's about awakening something powerful and ancient. Sigrid looked at me, her eyes wide in the dim light. What are you saying, Freya? I took a deep breath, trying to put my swirling thoughts into words. I'm saying that we might be in over our heads, literally and figuratively. But I also think we're meant to be here, that I'm meant to uncover whatever secrets are hidden in this place. As if in response to my words, the passage ahead of us suddenly illuminated, revealing a new chamber filled with ancient texts and artifacts. Well, Sigrid said, a hint of nervous laughter in her voice. I guess there's only one way to find out. Shall we? With the sound of rushing water at our backs and the promise of ancient knowledge before us, we stepped into the illuminated chamber, ready to face whatever challenges and revelations awaited us. Gasping for air, Sigrid and I stumbled into a vast underground hall, the roar of the flooding chamber fading behind us as a hidden door slid shut. We stood there for a moment, dripping wet and trying to catch our breath as our eyes adjusted to the dim light. The hall was enormous, its ceiling lost in shadows high above us. Massive stone columns lined the walls, each carved with intricate runes and scenes from Norse mythology. At the far end, barely visible in the gloom, stood a colossal statue of what appeared to be Odin, the All-Father of Norse gods. "This is incredible," Sigrid breathed, her voice filled with awe. I nodded, still too winded to speak. As we took in the majesty of our surroundings, a deep, resonant voice suddenly boomed throughout the chamber, seeming to come from everywhere at once. "Who dares enter the Hall of Trials?" The voice was so loud it made the ground beneath our feet vibrate. Sigrid and I instinctively huddled closer together. We seek knowledge," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "Knowledge of the Prose Edda and the secrets it holds." There was a moment of silence. Then the voice spoke again, slightly less thunderous this time. "Knowledge comes at a price, Seeker. Are you willing to pay it?" I glanced at Sigrid, who gave me a small nod of encouragement. "We are," I replied. "Then prove your worth. Face the trials of strength and wit. Only the worthy may pass." As the voice faded, the hall began to transform. The floor shifted and rose in places, creating a complex landscape of obstacles and challenges. "I guess we don't have much choice," Sigrid said, eyeing the newly formed course before us. We set off, navigating through a series of physical challenges that tested our strength, agility, and endurance. We climbed sheer rock walls, leaped across chasms, and squeezed through narrow passages. Each obstacle seemed designed to push us to our limits. As we neared what appeared to be the end of the physical trials, I turned to Sigrid, panting. "You know, I'm starting to think those yoga classes weren't such a waste of time after all." She managed a weak laugh. "Speak for yourself. I'm pretty sure I've pulled muscles I didn't even know I had." But our relief was short-lived. As we stepped onto a large circular platform, the voice boomed again. "The body has been tested. Now, the mind must prove its mettle." Suddenly, the air around me shimmered and warped. Sigrid vanished from my side, and I found myself alone in what looked like a dimly lit library. Bookshelves towered around me, stretching impossibly high. "Sigrid?" I called out, my voice echoing strangely in the vast space. There was no answer. As I turned, trying to get my bearings, I noticed something odd about the books. Their titles were constantly shifting, changing languages and alphabets faster than I could read them. And then I realized with a chill that the books were whispering. Thousands of voices murmured from the shelves, speaking in languages both familiar and utterly alien. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, until they were a deafening cacophony of sound. "Stop," I cried, covering my ears. But the voices were inside my head now, drowning out my thoughts. In that moment I understood. This was a test of my deepest fears. The fear of losing myself in the very knowledge I sought, of being overwhelmed by the weight of ancient secrets. I forced myself to take a deep breath, focusing on the reason I had come here in the first place. "I am the keeper of stories," I said aloud, my voice growing stronger with each word. "I do not fear knowledge, I embrace it." As I spoke, I felt a shift in the air around me. The whispers began to fade, and the library dissolved like mist in sunlight. I found myself back on the platform, Sigrid at my side, looking shaken. "Did you—" I began. She nodded. "Yeah, it was like being trapped in an endless battlefield. The clash of swords, the screams of the dying. It was my worst nightmare come to life." I squeezed her hand. "But we made it through." Before we could say more, the platform we were standing on began to move, carrying us towards the base of the Odin statue. As we drew closer, we could see that the statue's chest was covered in an intricate array of symbols and moving parts, a massive, three-dimensional puzzle. "Solve the riddle of the ages," the voice commanded. "Unlock the wisdom of the ancients." Sigrid and I approached the puzzle, studying its complex mechanism. It appeared to be a combination of runes, astronomical symbols, and interlocking gears. "Okay," I said, trying to make sense of the symbols. "I think these runes represent different Norse gods and their attributes. And these," I pointed to a series of concentric circles, "look like the branches of Yggdrasil, the world tree." Sigrid nodded, her brow furrowed in concentration. "And see how these gears interlock? I bet we need to align them in a specific way to make the whole thing work." We set to work, piecing together the puzzle bit by bit. It was slow, painstaking work, with each solved section revealing new complexities. Hours seemed to pass as we worked, our fingers becoming numb from manipulating the cold metal pieces. Finally, with a satisfying click, the last piece fell into place. The entire mechanism began to glow with an inner light, and the statue of Odin slowly moved aside, revealing a hidden passage. "We did it," Sigrid breathed, a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration in her voice. I nodded, too tired to speak. We had passed the trials, but at what cost? My mind felt raw from the psychic assault in the library illusion, and my body ached from the physical challenges. As we stepped towards the newly revealed passage, the voice spoke one last time. "You have proven yourselves worthy, seekers. But remember, the greatest trial still lies ahead." With those ominous words echoing in our ears, we entered the dark passage. We had taken only a few steps when I felt the ground shift beneath my feet. "Sigrid, watch out," I cried, but it was too late. The floor gave way entirely, and we were falling, tumbling through darkness. I reached out blindly, managing to grasp Sigrid's hand as we plummeted into the unknown. The fall seemed to last an eternity. Wind rushed past us, and I could hear Sigrid's terrified scream mingling with my own. Just as I was sure we were about to meet a gruesome end, our descent began to slow as if we were falling through water rather than air. We landed softly on what felt like a bed of moss, the impact far gentler than it should have been given the length of our fall. For a moment we lay there in total darkness, our ragged breathing the only sound. "Freya?" Sigrid's voice came weakly from beside me. "Are you okay?" "I think so," I replied, slowly sitting up and taking stock of my body. Nothing seemed to be broken. "You?" "Same. But where are we?" As if in answer to her question, a soft light began to grow around us. We found ourselves in a small circular chamber, its walls covered in luminescent moss that gave off a pale blue-green glow. At the center of the chamber stood a pedestal, and on it rested a book that seemed to radiate power. Its cover was made of some dark, iridescent material that shifted and swirled as we watched. "Is that?" Sigrid whispered, her eyes wide. I nodded, a mixture of excitement and trepidation filling me. "I think it's the prose Edda, or at least a version of it we've never seen before." As we approached the pedestal, I could feel the book calling to me, its secrets yearning to be unlocked. But I hesitated, remembering the warning voice's final words. "The greatest trial still lies ahead," I murmured. Sigrid looked at me, her face serious in the eerie light. "Whatever happens next, we face it together, right?" I took a deep breath and nodded. "Together." With trembling hands, I reached out and opened the book, unleashing whatever ancient power it contained. As the pages began to turn of their own accord, filling the chamber with a blinding light, I realized that our journey was far from over. In fact, it was only just beginning. The blinding light faded, and I found myself lying on a cold stone floor, my head throbbing. As I blinked away the spots dancing in my vision, I realized we were in an entirely new place. Towering bookshelves surrounded us, stretching up into shadows so deep I couldn't see where they ended. "Sigrid?" I called out, my voice hoarse. "Over here," came her reply from somewhere to my left. I turned to see her pulling herself up, using one of the bookshelves for support. "Are you okay?" I nodded, slowly getting to my feet. "I think so. Where are we?" As our eyes adjusted to the dim light, we began to take in our surroundings. We were in an enormous library, unlike anything I'd ever seen. The air was thick with the scent of old parchment and leather. Dust motes danced in shafts of light that seemed to have no source. "Look at these," Sigrid breathed, reaching out to touch one of the books. "They're all in Old Norse, and some of these look even older." I moved to join her, my academic excitement overriding my lingering disorientation. The books were indeed ancient, their spines cracked and worn with age. As I ran my fingers along the shelves, I felt a jolt of recognition. "Sigrid, these aren't just any manuscripts. These are lost works we've only heard rumors about. Look, Here's the complete saga of Harold Fairhair, and over there, is that the original Völuspá? We moved through the library in a daze, each shelf revealing new treasures. But it was a small, unassuming, leather-bound journal tucked away in a corner that caught my eye. "What's this?" I murmured, carefully opening the fragile book. As I read the first page, I gasped. "Sigrid, you're not going to believe this. It's Snorri Sturluson's personal journal." Sigrid hurried over, her eyes wide. "Are you serious? That's impossible. All of Snorri's personal writings were thought to be lost centuries ago." I nodded, my hands shaking slightly as I turned the pages. "I know, but this is definitely his handwriting. And listen to this. I write these words in secret, for the knowledge I have uncovered must never fall into the wrong hands. The Prose Edda is more than a collection of stories. It is a key to power beyond mortal comprehension. I have taken steps to protect this knowledge, scattering clues across the land and sea. Only one of my own blood, with a pure heart and keen mind, can hope to unravel the mystery." Sigrid let out a low whistle. "So the Prose Edda really is more than just myths and legends, but what kind of power is he talking about?" I continued reading, my excitement growing with each revelation. According to this, Snorri discovered that the Norse gods were more than just stories. They were based on real beings, incredibly powerful and long-lived but not truly immortal, and the Prose Edda contains the secret to accessing their power. That's incredible," Sigrid said, her voice a mixture of awe and skepticism. "But if it's true, why would Snorri want to hide this knowledge?" I flipped through more pages, skimming rapidly. "He says it's too dangerous. In the wrong hands, this power could reshape the world, overthrow kingdoms, even potentially bring about Ragnarok itself." As we pored over the journal, piecing together Snorri's secret quest, a low rumbling sound filled the library. At first, I thought it was just the settling of the ancient structure around us, but then I saw a movement out of the corner of my eye. "Sigrid," I whispered, slowly looking up. "Don't make any sudden moves." She followed my gaze and froze. The statues that lined the walls of the library, representations of Norse gods and heroes, were moving. Stone ground against stone as they stepped down from their pedestals, their blank eyes fixed on us. "What do we do?" Sigrid hissed, slowly backing away. I clutched Snorri's journal to my chest, my mind racing. "The runes," I said, remembering details from the journal. "Snorri mentioned protective runes. Look for markings on the floor or walls." We split up, frantically searching the library as the stone figures advanced. Their movements were slow but relentless, the sound of their footsteps echoing ominously through the cavernous space. "Here," Sigrid called out. She was standing by a section of wall covered in intricate runic inscriptions. "But I can't read them." I rushed over, the animated statues closing in behind us. My eyes darted over the runes, my mind connecting them to passages I'd read in Snorri's journal. "Protection, binding, reveal," I muttered, tracing the shapes with my finger. As I spoke the final word, the runes began to glow with a soft blue light. A shimmering barrier sprang up between us and the statues. They pressed against it, their stone faces twisting in silent fury, but they couldn't break through. "That was too close," Sigrid said, leaning against the wall and catching her breath. I nodded, my heart still racing. But why would Snorri set up such dangerous protections? What was he so afraid of? Returning to the journal, I read on, my brow furrowing as I uncovered a tale of betrayal and deceit that stretched back to Snorri's own time. "According to this," I said, my voice tight with disbelief, "Snorri wasn't working alone. He was part of a secret society dedicated to protecting the knowledge of the Norse gods. But one of their own betrayed them, trying to use the power for himself." Sigrid leaned in, her eyes wide. "Who was it?" I swallowed hard, the implications hitting me like a physical blow. "It was Sturla Thordarson, Snorri's own nephew. The man history remembers as Snorri's faithful biographer was actually responsible for his death." "But that changes everything we know about that period of history," Sigrid breathed. I nodded grimly. And it explains why Snorri went to such lengths to hide and protect this knowledge. He knew Sturla would stop at nothing to get it. As we digested this earth-shattering revelation, a new sound reached our ears, the grinding of stone on stone, but much louder than before. "The barrier won't hold forever," I said, looking nervously at the straining statues. "We need to find a way out of here." We gathered as many manuscripts as we could carry, including Snorri's journal, and began searching for an exit. But as we moved through the library, the very walls seemed to shift and change around us. "It's like a labyrinth," Sigrid said, frustration evident in her voice. "How are we supposed to find our way out if the paths keep changing?" I was about to respond when a violent tremor shook the cavern. Dust and small rocks rained down from the ceiling. "The whole place is coming down!" I shouted over the rumbling. "Run!" We sprinted through the shifting corridors, the sound of collapsing stone growing louder behind us. Just when it seemed we were hopelessly lost, I spotted a faint glow ahead. "There," I pointed. "I think that's our way out." As we raced towards the light, I could feel the floor crumbling beneath our feet. With a final desperate leap, we threw ourselves through the opening, tumbling onto solid ground as the library collapsed behind us. We lay there for a moment, gasping for breath, the manuscripts clutched tightly to our chests. When I finally looked up, I realized we were back in the original cave system, near where we'd first entered. "We made it," Sigrid said, her voice weak with relief. I nodded, still trying to process everything we'd learned. "But this is just the beginning, isn't it? Now that we know the truth about the Prose Edda, about Snorri's quest?" Sigrid sat up, her face serious. "We have a responsibility to protect this knowledge, just like Snorri did. And to stop anyone who might try to misuse it," I added, thinking of Dr. Erickson and whoever else might be after these secrets. As we gathered ourselves and prepared to leave the cave, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had set something in motion, something bigger than either of us could imagine. The echoes of the past were reaching into the present, and the fate of the future might well rest in our hands. "Whatever comes next," I said, meeting Sigrid's determined gaze, "we face it together." She nodded, a small smile on her face despite the gravity of our situation. "Together. Now let's get out of here and figure out our next move." The cave's exit loomed before us, a sliver of daylight growing larger with each stumbling step. Behind us, the rumble of collapsing stone grew louder, spurring us on despite our exhaustion. "Almost there," I shouted to Sigrid over the din, clutching the precious manuscripts to my chest. With a final burst of speed, we burst out of the cave mouth, the force of our momentum carrying us several steps onto a narrow ledge. We turned just in time to see the entrance collapse in a cloud of dust and debris. "That was too close," Sigrid panted, hands on her knees as she caught her breath. I nodded, unable to speak for a moment as I gulped in the crisp, salty air. We were on a cliff face high above the sea, waves crashing against the rocks far below. The wind whipped around us, carrying a biting chill that cut through our damp clothes. As the adrenaline of our escape began to fade, I took stock of our situation. "We need to figure out where we are and how to get back to civilization," I said, shielding my eyes against the glare as I scanned the horizon. Sigrid was doing the same, her brow furrowed in concentration. "I think I see some kind of structure over there," she said, pointing to a distant outcropping. "Maybe a lighthouse or a weather station?" I was about to agree when something caught my eye, a flash of movement on a ledge below us. "Wait," I said, grabbing Sigrid's arm. "We're not alone." We crouched low, peering over the edge of our perch. There, making his way along a treacherous path, was a figure we both recognized immediately. "Dr. Erickson," Sigrid hissed, her voice filled with anger and disbelief. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind. How did he find us? And how did he get here so quickly? As we watched, Erickson paused, pulling something from his backpack. My heart sank as I recognized the distinctive leather binding of Snorri's journal. He must have gotten to it before the cave collapsed, I said, my mind racing. We have to get it back. That journal is the key to everything. Sigrid nodded grimly. So much for finding a way back to civilization. Looks like we're in for another chase. We began our descent, picking our way carefully along the cliff face. The path was treacherous, slick with sea spray and crumbling in places. More than once we had to backtrack to find a safer route. As we climbed, the wind grew fiercer, howling around us and threatening to tear us from our precarious handholds. Icy pellets of rain began to fall, further complicating our progress. "He's heading for that structure we saw," Sigrid called out, pointing ahead through the worsening weather. I squinted through the rain, seeing Ericsson's figure disappearing around a bend in the path. "We can't let him get away," I shouted back. "Who knows what he'll do with that information?" We pressed on, our muscles screaming in protest after the ordeals we'd already endured. The rain turned to sleet, coating the rocks in a treacherous layer of ice. Each step became a battle against the elements and our own exhaustion. Finally, we rounded the bend and saw Ericsson clearly. He was only 100 yards ahead, struggling against the wind as he approached the structure, which I could now see was indeed an old lighthouse. "Dr. Ericsson," I called out, my voice nearly lost in the howling gale. "Stop." He turned, surprise and then anger flashing across his face as he saw us. For a moment, he seemed to consider standing his ground. Then, with a look of determination, he turned and ran towards the lighthouse. "After him!" Sigrid yelled, breaking into a run. We gave chase, our feet slipping on the icy rocks. Ericsson reached the lighthouse door just as we closed in, fumbling with the lock. "It's over, Ericsson," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Give us the journal and we can end this peacefully." He turned to face us, his expression a mixture of desperation and defiance. "You don't understand what's at stake here," he shouted over the wind. "This knowledge, it could change everything, rewrite history as we know it. That's why it needs to be protected," I argued, "not exploited for personal gain." Ericsson's face hardened. "Protected? By whom? You? You're just a girl playing at scholar. You have no idea of the forces you're dealing with." Before I could respond, a particularly violent gust of wind hit us. Ericsson, standing closer to the edge, lost his footing. With a cry of terror, he toppled backwards, barely managing to grab onto a jutting rock as he fell. "Help me!" he screamed, his legs dangling over the precipice, the journal slipping from his grasp and falling into the churning sea below. For a split second I hesitated. This man had chased us, threatened us, and tried to steal invaluable historical artifacts. But could I really let him fall to his death? "Freya, what are you doing?" Sigrid yelled as I moved towards Ericsson. I dropped to my stomach, reaching out to grasp Ericsson's wrist. "Hold on," I grunted, straining against his weight. "Sigrid, help me pull him up." Together we managed to haul Ericsson back onto solid ground. He lay there for a moment, gasping and shaking. "Why?" he finally managed to ask, looking up at me with confusion in his eyes. I met his gaze steadily. "Because that's not who I am, and it's not what this knowledge is for." As we caught our breath, the lighthouse door creaked open behind us. An old man peered out, his weathered face a mask of surprise. "Well now," he said in heavily accented English, "looks like you folks could use a hand. Come in. Come in. Storm's only going to get worse." Grateful for the shelter, we followed him inside. Over mugs of strong coffee, we explained our situation, or at least a version of it that didn't involve ancient Norse magic and animated statues. The old lighthouse keeper, who introduced himself as Björn, listened with rapt attention. "Quite an adventure you've had," he said when we finished. "I can radio for a boat to take you back to Reykjavik in the morning once this storm passes." As we settled in for the night, I pulled Sigrid aside. "We need to be careful," I whispered. "We still don't know who else might be after this knowledge." She nodded, her expression serious. "And we lost Snorri's journal. How much of a setback is that?" I sighed, running a hand through my tangled hair. "It's a big loss, but not insurmountable. We still have the other manuscripts, and more importantly, We have what we learned. We just need to figure out our next move. The next morning, true to his word, Björn radioed for a boat. As we prepared to leave, I approached Eriksson, who had been sullen and quiet since his near-death experience. "What will you do now?" I asked. He looked at me for a long moment before responding. I need to rethink some things. This quest, it's cost me more than I ever imagined it would." I nodded, understanding all too well. "Just be careful. There are forces at work here bigger than any of us." The boat ride back to Reykjavik was uneventful, giving us time to rest and plan. We had arranged for a safe house through contacts of Sigrid's, a place where we could regroup and study the manuscripts we'd managed to save. But as we approached the nondescript apartment building in a quiet part of the city, we knew immediately that something was wrong. The door was ajar, hanging off its hinges. "Stay behind me," Sigrid whispered, her body tense as we entered. The apartment was a disaster. Furniture overturned, papers strewn everywhere, and most alarmingly, no sign of Sigrid's contacts who were supposed to meet us here. "They're gone," I said, my voice hollow as I surveyed the destruction. "And look, the manuscripts are missing too." Sigrid cursed under her breath, quickly checking the other rooms. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were looking for, but how? Who else knew about this place? I shook my head, a feeling of dread settling over me. "I don't know. But this is bigger than we thought, Sigrid. Someone is always one step ahead of us." As we stood in the ransacked apartment, the weight of our situation truly hit me. We were up against unknown forces, racing against time to protect knowledge that could reshape the world. And now, we were back to square one, with no allies and no safe haven. "What do we do now?" Sigrid asked, voicing the question that was foremost in both our minds. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing thoughts. "We keep going. We find new allies, track down more clues. Whatever it takes." Sigrid nodded, a determined glint in her eye. "Together?" "Together," I affirmed, managing a small smile despite our dire circumstances. As we left the apartment, stepping back onto the streets of Reykjavik, I couldn't shake the feeling that our real journey was only just beginning. The soft glow of the laptop screen illuminated our tired faces as Sigrid and I pored over digital copies of the manuscripts we had managed to photograph before they were stolen. We had been working non-stop for days, holed up in a small, nondescript hotel room on the outskirts of Reykjavik. "There has to be something here," I muttered, rubbing my eyes. "Some clue we've missed." Sigrid leaned back in her chair, stretching. "Maybe we're looking at this all wrong. Snorri was clever. He wouldn't have made it easy to find." As I scrolled through another page of dense Old Norse text, something caught my eye. A series of runes that didn't quite fit with the rest of the passage. "Wait a second," I said, sitting up straighter. "Look at this." Sigrid leaned in, her brow furrowed. "It looks like gibberish." "Not gibberish," I said, excitement building in my voice. "It's a code. See how these runes are slightly different from the others? They're not meant to be read as part of the text." We spent the next few hours decoding the hidden message, our fatigue forgotten in the thrill of discovery. As the first rays of dawn crept through the window, we sat back, staring at the translated message in awe. "Beneath the frozen tears of Autumla lies the ship of secrets," I read aloud. Autumla was the primeval cow in Norse mythology, whose milk nourished the first beings. Sigrid's eyes widened in realization. "Frozen tears! It's talking about a glacier, but which one?" I scanned the rest of the decoded message, my heart racing. "There's more. It mentions Hrafnafloki, the Viking explorer who discovered Iceland. Legend says he landed on the south coast, near what's now Vatnajökull National Park." "The Vatnajökull Glacier," Sigrid breathed. "That's where we need to go." Within hours, we were in a rented jeep, speeding towards the national park. The landscape changed dramatically as we drove, lush fields giving way to stark, volcanic terrain. and finally the looming presence of Europe's largest glacier. As we approached the glacier's edge, I felt a strange pull, as if some unseen force was guiding us. "There," I said, pointing to a section of the ice that seemed slightly different from its surroundings. "That's where we need to look." With the help of local guides sworn to secrecy, we began our excavation. Days of careful digging passed, the anticipation building with each layer of ice we removed. And then on the 5th day we hit something solid. "It's wood," one of the guides shouted, his voice echoing across the icy expanse. As we cleared away more ice, the unmistakable shape of a Viking longship emerged. Despite being buried for centuries, the ship was remarkably well preserved, its dragon-headed prow still fierce and proud. "It's incredible," Sigrid whispered, running her hand along the ancient wood. "But how are we supposed to sail it? We can't exactly drag it to the ocean." As if in answer to her question, I noticed something carved into the ship's side, another runic message. As I deciphered it, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the surrounding ice. "Speak the words of awakening, and the path shall reveal itself," I translated. I think this ship is more than just wood and nails, Sigrid." Taking a deep breath, I spoke the words written in the runes, my voice carrying across the glacier. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a groan that seemed to come from the earth itself, the ice around the ship began to melt at an impossible rate. The guides backed away in fear, crossing themselves and muttering prayers. Sigrid and I watched in awe as a channel of water formed, leading from the ship all the way to the distant ocean. "Are we really doing this?" Sigrid asked, a mix of excitement and fear in her voice. I nodded, climbing aboard the ancient vessel. "We've come too far to turn back now." As soon as we were both on board, the ship began to move of its own accord, gliding down the magically formed channel towards the open sea. We watched in amazement as the glacier sealed itself behind us, erasing any evidence of our discovery. Once we hit the open water, I pulled out the notes I had made from Snorri's journal before it was lost. According to this, we need to sail north by northwest, following the path of the Raven Star. Sigrid looked up at the sky, frowning. "But it's daylight. We can't see any stars." As if in response to her words, a spectral constellation appeared in the sky above us. A raven formed of ghostly light. "I guess that's our guide," I said, still trying to process the impossible things we were witnessing. We sailed for days, the magical ship navigating the treacherous North Atlantic with ease. The weather remained surprisingly calm, as if the very elements were conspiring to aid our journey. On the 5th day of our voyage, as we sat on deck discussing our next move, a terrible roar split the air. The sea around us began to churn violently. "What's happening?" Sigrid shouted over the sudden wind. Before I could answer, a massive shape burst from the waves beside our ship. It was a serpent, larger than any creature I had ever seen or imagined. Its scales gleamed with an otherworldly iridescence, and its eyes glowed with an ancient, terrible intelligence. "It's Jörmungandr," I gasped, recognizing the legendary world serpent from Norse mythology. But it can't be real. Real or not, the serpent was very much a threat. It coiled around our ship, its enormous body threatening to crush us. I frantically searched my memories of the myths, trying to recall anything that might save us. The horn, I suddenly remembered. Vikings believed the sound of a horn could drive away sea monsters. Sigrid dashed to the ship's prow, where an intricately carved horn hung. She grabbed it and blew with all her might. The sound that emerged was unlike anything I had ever heard, deep and resonant, seeming to shake the very air around us. The serpent recoiled, loosening its grip on the ship. With a final, ear-splitting shriek, it dove back into the depths, leaving us shaken but alive. As the sea calmed, I felt a strange sensation wash over me. The world around me seemed to fade, replaced by a misty, dreamlike landscape. And there, standing before me, was a man I recognized from ancient illustrations, Snorri Sturluson himself. You have come far, keeper of stories, Snorri said, his voice echoing strangely in the misty realm. Am I dreaming? I asked, my own voice sounding distant to my ears. Snorri smiled enigmatically. Dreams, visions, reality. At the edges of the world, such distinctions matter little. You seek the truth of the hidden manuscripts, do you not? I nodded, unable to speak. Know then that their purpose is not mere knowledge, but balance, Snorri continued. The old gods are stirring, drawn by the belief and fear of men. The manuscripts contain the power to keep them in check, to maintain the boundary between their world and ours. But why hide this knowledge? I asked. Why not use it? Snorri's expression grew grave. Power such as this corrupts absolutely. It must be guarded, used only in the direst need. That is the task I pass to you, keeper of stories. Guard the balance, lest the twilight of the gods descend upon the world of men. Before I could ask more, the vision faded. I found myself back on the ship, Sigrid shaking me urgently. Freya, are you all right? You went all glassy-eyed for a moment there. I blinked, trying to process what I had seen. I'm fine. I saw Snorri. He told me the true purpose of the manuscripts. As I relayed my vision to Sigrid, the mists around our ship began to part, revealing a rocky shore ahead. The island that emerged seemed to shimmer and shift, as if it wasn't quite part of our reality. Is that it? Sigrid asked, her voice hushed with awe. The final resting place of the manuscripts? I nodded, a mix of excitement and trepidation filling me. I think so. But something tells me our greatest challenge still lies ahead. As our ship approached the mystical shore, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were crossing a threshold, not just to a hidden island, but to a realm where the lines between myth and reality blurred. Whatever awaited us on that misty shore would change everything, not just for us, but potentially for the entire world. Ready? I asked Sigrid as we prepared to disembark. She nodded, her face set with determination. Ready? Let's finish this. Together we stepped off the ancient longship and onto the shores of an island that seemed to exist outside of time and space, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead in our quest to safeguard the balance between the world of gods and the world of men. The mist-shrouded island materialized before us as our battered longship cut through the choppy waters. An eerie stillness hung in the air, broken only by the gentle lapping of waves against the shore. As we stepped onto the beach, the sand beneath our feet seemed to shift and shimmer as if struggling to maintain its form. This place, I whispered. It doesn't feel real. My guide, Eric, nodded grimly. The ancient texts speak of realms beyond our own, where the lines between reality and myth blur. We must tread carefully. No sooner had the words left his mouth than the landscape around us began to warp and change. The beach melted away, replaced by a dense forest that seemed to breathe with a life of its own. Massive roots twisted beneath our feet, forming a maze-like pattern that stretched as far as the eye could see. It's a labyrinth, I realized aloud. But not just of paths, of illusions. Eric drew his sword, its blade glinting in the strange, shifting light. Remember what we've learned. Norse mythology is filled with trickery and deception. We must rely on our knowledge to see through the lies. As if in response to his words, the forest before us split into 3 distinct paths. Each one shimmered with a different hue, gold, silver, and bronze. A disembodied voice echoed through the trees. Choose wisely, seekers of truth. One path leads to glory, one to ruin, and one to that which you seek. But beware, appearances can be deceiving. I closed my eyes, forcing myself to think. In Norse mythology, gold is often associated with the gods and their realm, Asgard. It's tempting, but too obvious. Eric finished my thought. A trap for the greedy or unprepared. I nodded, turning my attention to the silver path. Silver is linked to the moon, to magic and mystery. It could be the way forward, but it might also lead us astray into endless illusions. Which leaves bronze, Eric mused. Less glamorous, but associated with humanity, I concluded, with craftsmanship and perseverance, the qualities we'll need to unravel this mystery. Without further hesitation, we stepped onto the bronze path. The moment our feet touched it, the other paths vanished, and we found ourselves plunged into a series of vivid, lifelike scenes from Norse mythology. We witnessed the creation of the world from the body of the giant Ymir, saw the gods constructing Asgard, and felt the terror of Ragnarok looming on the horizon. Each vision tested our knowledge, forcing us to separate truth from embellishment, myth from historical fact. "Look there," Eric shouted, pointing to a flickering image of Odin hanging from Yggdrasil, the world tree. "The runes he's carving, they're wrong." I squinted, recognizing the trap. "You're right. Those aren't the runes of knowledge Odin sacrificed himself to obtain. It's a test. We have to correct them." Working together, we rearranged the illusory runes, and the scene before us shattered like glass. We found ourselves standing before a massive stone door, covered in intricate carvings. "The final chamber," I breathed, my heart pounding with anticipation. But as we approached, a spectral figure materialized before us, a towering warrior clad in ancient armor, his face hidden beneath a winged helm. When he spoke, his voice rumbled like distant thunder. "I am Hakon the Old, guardian of secrets long forgotten. You who seek the hidden wisdom of the Skalds, prove your worth, or be forever lost to the mists of time." Eric raised his sword, but I placed a hand on his arm. "No," I said softly. "This isn't a test of strength. It's a test of knowledge." I stepped forward, meeting the spirit's gaze. "Great Hakon, we have journeyed far and overcome many trials to reach this place. We seek the lost manuscripts of the Prose Edda, not for personal gain, but to preserve the wisdom they contain for future generations." The spectral king tilted his head, considering my words. "Pretty speech, young scholar. But words alone are not enough. Answer me this. What is the true power of the stories contained within those ancient pages?" I took a deep breath, thinking carefully before responding. "The true power lies not in secret knowledge or magical incantations, but in the connections they forge between people across time and culture. These stories have endured for centuries because they speak to something fundamental in the human experience. Our fears, our hopes, our search for meaning in a chaotic world." Hakon nodded slowly. "A worthy answer, but knowledge without action is meaningless. Are you prepared to bear the burden that comes with these manuscripts? To protect them, even at great personal cost?" "I am," I said firmly, though my voice trembled slightly. The spirit raised his hand, and the stone door behind him began to grind open. "Then enter, seekers of truth. But be warned, the price of wisdom is often higher than you expect." As the door swung wide, revealing a chamber bathed in otherworldly light, a bone-chilling scream echoed from behind us. I whirled to see Eric caught in a tangle of ghostly roots that were rapidly pulling him into the ground. "Eric!" I cried, lunging for him, but Hakon's spectral form blocked my path. "Choose, scholar," the spirit intoned. "The manuscripts lie within your grasp, but your companion's life hangs in the balance. Which will you sacrifice?" Time seemed to slow as I stood frozen between my lifelong quest and the life of my friend. The manuscripts contained knowledge that could reshape our understanding of history and mythology. But at what cost? In that moment, I saw the truth that had eluded me throughout our journey. The real power of these stories wasn't in some hidden magical knowledge. It was in the way they brought people together, the bonds they forged. "I choose him," I said firmly, turning away from the open door and rushing to Eric's side. Together we fought against the ghostly tendrils, and with a final, desperate heave, I pulled him free. As we collapsed onto the ground, panting, I looked up to see Hakon's spirit watching us with what seemed like approval in his ethereal eyes. "You have chosen wisely," he said. "The true legacy of the Skalds lies not in dusty tomes, but in the stories we live and the connections we forge. You have proven yourself worthy of the knowledge you seek." With those words, the island around us began to fade like mist in the morning sun. The last thing I saw before everything dissolved was the open doorway, a warm, inviting light spilling from within. As the world rematerialized around us, we found ourselves back on our longship adrift in the vast North Atlantic. But we were not empty-handed. In my arms lay a bundle of ancient parchments, their pages filled with the long-lost words of Snorri Sturluson. Eric, still shaken but alive, managed a weak smile. It seems, my friend, that the greatest test was not of our knowledge, but of our hearts. I nodded, carefully unrolling one of the precious manuscripts. And in passing that test, we've unlocked something far more valuable than mere words on a page. As the sun broke through the clouds, illuminating the ancient text, I realized that our journey was far from over. The true challenge, preserving and sharing this knowledge with the world, was only just beginning. The journey back to Reykjavik was a blur of exhaustion and elation. As our ship docked in the harbor, I clutched the precious bundle of manuscripts to my chest, hardly daring to believe we'd succeeded. But the victory was bittersweet. Eric limped down the gangplank, his face etched with pain. The mystical roots that had nearly dragged him into the earth on that vanishing island had left their mark. Dark tendrils snaked beneath his skin, a constant reminder of how close we'd come to failure. "We need to get you to a hospital," I insisted, but Eric shook his head. "No time," he growled. "We need to secure the manuscripts first. My contacts have arranged a safe house." As we made our way through the winding streets of Reykjavik, I couldn't shake the feeling we were being watched. Shadows seemed to move of their own accord, and more than once I caught glimpses of hooded figures ducking out of sight. The safe house turned out to be a nondescript apartment above a fish market. The smell of the sea permeated everything, but I barely noticed as I spread the ancient parchments across a weathered table. "It's really them," I breathed, running my fingers reverently over the faded runes. Snorri Sturluson's lost manuscripts. Eric collapsed into a chair, his breathing labored. "Then let's not waste any time. Start translating." For days I pored over the texts, my excitement growing with each passing hour. The manuscripts contained far more than just mythological stories. They were a window into a lost world, filled with historical details and cultural insights that had been lost to time. "Eric, listen to this," I said, my voice trembling with excitement. According to Snorri, the Prose Edda wasn't just a collection of myths. It was a code, a way of preserving ancient knowledge that predated even the Norse settlements in Iceland. Eric leaned forward, wincing slightly. "What kind of knowledge?" "Everything," I replied, gesturing to the scattered papers. "Astronomical observations, navigation techniques, medical knowledge, and hints of something even greater. Snorri talks about a hidden realm that exists alongside our own, a place where the gods themselves once walked." A sharp knock at the door cut our conversation short. Eric was on his feet in an instant, hand going to the weapon at his side. "Were you followed?" he hissed. Before I could answer, the door burst open. 3 figures in dark robes swept into the room, their faces hidden beneath deep hoods. "The manuscripts," one of them intoned, voice muffled. "Hand them over, and you may yet leave this place alive." Eric drew his sword, but I could see the effort cost him. The magical infection from the island was spreading, weakening him by the hour. "Who are you?" I demanded, trying to buy time as I frantically gathered the scattered pages. The lead figure pulled back his hood, revealing a face lined with age and marked with intricate tattoos. "We are the keepers of Yggdrasil, sworn to protect the secrets of the ancient world from those who would misuse them." "Misuse them?" I scoffed. "We're trying to preserve this knowledge, to share it with the world." The old man's eyes narrowed. "You are a fool if you think the world is ready for such revelations. The manuscripts must be destroyed for the good of all." As he spoke, his companions began to advance. Eric moved to intercept them, but his weakened state betrayed him. With a single brutal strike, one of the keepers sent him crashing to the ground. "Eric!" I cried, torn between helping my friend and protecting the manuscripts. In that moment of indecision, the third keeper lunged for the papers, but as his hand touched the ancient parchment, something extraordinary happened. The runes began to glow with an otherworldly light, and a voice that was not my own spilled from my lips. Hear me, keepers of Yggdrasil. You who claim to protect the ancient wisdom have become its jailers. The time of hiding is past. The world teeters on the brink of chaos, and only by embracing the knowledge of our ancestors can we hope to survive. The keepers recoiled, shock evident on their faces. How? The old man whispered. How do you know the ancient tongue? The words continued to flow through me, a torrent of archaic Norse that I somehow understood perfectly. I spoke of the hidden realms, of the cyclical nature of time, and of a coming darkness that threatened to engulf the world. As I finished, silence fell over the room. The keepers stared at me in awe and fear. Finally, the old man spoke. It seems we have misjudged you, scholar. The manuscripts themselves have chosen you as their voice. We cannot stand in the way of such a clear sign. With that, the keepers bowed deeply and withdrew, leaving us alone once more. Eric groaned, struggling to sit up. What just happened? I shook my head, still dazed. I'm not entirely sure, but I think we just gained some powerful allies. Over the next weeks, I threw myself into completing the translations, now aided by the strange new knowledge that had awakened within me. The manuscripts revealed a tapestry of interconnected myths and histories, stretching back to the dawn of human civilization. But as I neared the end of the final text, a realization began to dawn on me. The true power of the prose Edda wasn't in its secrets or prophecies. It was in the stories themselves, the tales of gods and heroes, of triumph and tragedy, that had captivated people for centuries. Don't you see, Eric? I explained, my eyes shining with excitement. These stories aren't just entertainment. They're a blueprint for understanding the human experience. They teach us about courage, sacrifice, the consequences of our actions. They connect us to our past and give us guidance for the future. Eric, his condition stabilized thanks to knowledge gleaned from the manuscripts, nodded slowly. So what do we do now? How do we share this with the world without causing panic or misuse? I smiled, an idea forming. We do what the skalds have always done. We tell the stories. Not all at once, not every secret, but we reintroduce these myths to the world, let people rediscover their power and wisdom for themselves. Over the next months, we worked tirelessly to prepare the manuscripts for publication. We collaborated with historians, linguists, and even the keepers of Yggdrasil to ensure the knowledge was presented responsibly. The day our book hit the shelves, I stood in a small Reykjavik bookshop, watching as people eagerly snatched up copies. An old woman approached me, her eyes twinkling. You're the author, aren't you? The one who found the lost manuscripts? I nodded, somewhat bashfully. She smiled, patting my hand. Thank you, dear. These old stories, they remind us of who we are, where we came from. In these troubled times, that's more important than ever. As she walked away, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment wash over me. We hadn't just preserved ancient texts. We had rekindled a connection to our shared human heritage. Eric appeared at my side, looking healthier than he had in months. Ready for the next adventure? He asked with a grin. I laughed, gesturing to the bustling bookshop. My friend, I think the adventure is just beginning. These stories have the power to change the world. Now it's up to us to make sure they're heard. As we stepped out into the crisp Icelandic air, I felt a sense of excitement for the future. The legacy of the skalds lived on, not in dusty tomes or hidden chambers, but in the hearts and minds of people around the world. And I knew that as long as these stories continued to be told, a piece of that ancient wisdom would live on, connecting us all through the power of myth and the enduring human